What's good, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. Tell a colleague, tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell anybody that you think could benefit from the content of these episodes. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this podcast. My company helps build meaningful relationships with senior sales leaders and introduces them to ambitious startups who are ready for the next stage of growth. Go to thejddavidgroup.com to schedule a call with me so I can talk to you about how I can help you. This podcast is also, by the way, being sponsored by Allego. Allego is the market leader for virtual learning and enablement solutions. Transform your organization with the mobile platform built for today's distributed teams. And what's interesting, by the way, about that is that I've been working with them since 2015, and it's always been for distributed teams. But of course, Devin, today it is more poignant than ever. The aforementioned Devin that I just mentioned is Devin Golden. He's formerly the Senior Vice President of Sales at Dun Bradstreet, and now recently, or soon, I believe, as of Monday, and you can clarify that, Devin, when I turn it over to you, is going to be a sales leader at Motus, which is a workforce reimbursement software. Devin, welcome to Over Quota.
Jay, thank you, friend. It's been we've known each other for, we were talking about it earlier, about 15 years, and really happy to join you on the podcast.
Yeah, and guys, this is the epitome of, I think, what it means to have relationships, just in life, but certainly in business. As if you're a listener of this podcast regularly, you know that I publish every Monday, and I got so busy towards the end of 2020, so at the end of last year, and frankly to start this year, that I had run out of guests to interview. I usually like to interview guests 2 and 3 weeks in advance so that I have someone ready to go every Monday, and the inventory was dry. So I called Devin literally yesterday, and I was like, what are you doing between now and Monday? He said, what do you need? And I said, you want to do an interview with me? So, that, shows that relationships matter, but also shows what a great person Devin is. And I want to say thank you for that.
My pleasure, Jay.
So let's just start with what I had ended with there. Recently, with Dun Bradstreet, and now with a new opportunity. Tell me about that. Tell me about the transition and why you decided to join Modus, and what you were looking for in your next opportunity.
Sure. First off, I had a phenomenal experience at Dun Bradstreet. 6 years. I was part of an acquisition, and it's something that I will always look back with fondly. For me, the experience of joining Modus was I felt that there was tremendous potential in the opportunity, not only to grow professionally, but also really an opportunity to take some of the things that I've learned over the course of my career and apply it to a new industry. And I was incredibly impressed with the culture. For me, I think that I've always had success in my career looking for companies that were looking to grow rapidly, whether it be in startup mode or one that maybe had gone down the wrong path and needed a little bit of help turning around and accelerating towards revenue growth. And with Modus, I see a tremendous opportunity in that they play in a couple of different spaces around reimbursement. One is around fleet. So if you think about car and mileage, they're the leader in that particular space, but they've started to move into other areas like device management, work management, and living cost reimbursement. And to me, I see that as a tremendous opportunity to take a loyal customer base or to go out in the market with a recognized name and to bring new solutions to solve reimbursement problems for companies. So I'm very excited about that. And I always have enjoyed being the point of the spear in running new business and really focusing my efforts on the new business team. I'm incredibly excited about that, Jay.
So let's talk about that. Tell me, obviously they were in need of a sales leader such as yourself. What precipitated that need? What are they asking you to do? What's the vision? Where are they asking you to take the business?
Sure. So I think from an organizational standpoint, it's a very young sales organization in terms of tenure. And one of the things they're looking for me to do is to help build and develop a rep training and development program. As you know, most people, when they leave organizations, it's because they don't feel like they've been invested in, or they don't like their boss.
Yes.
So, from my perspective, I think that people management skills is something that, I've learned over the course of my career. Made some mistakes along the way, but I feel like being able to communicate with open and transparent communication is something that I do well. And I think that's what people crave. But also building a development program to bring young sales reps into the organization, whether it be promoting them from BDRs or whether bringing them from other organizations, and help them develop life skills and sales skills that's going to pay dividends not only for Modus, but for them over the course of their future career.
How do you go about doing that? Obviously, you've done that multiple times in the past. Where do you begin, I guess?
Well, I think it's really understanding what's in place.
Mm,
So when I look at the team, and I'm still in the honeymoon, literally having started on Monday,
mm.
I will say that we use Allegro, excuse me. Really excited about
Oh, wow.
digging into that. So apropos that they're a sponsor, really understanding, how do you put together a curriculum that you can certify people through the process? One of the things that I have found is there's a couple of things that are incredibly important. Number one is that you set up very clear milestones as part of that development program, and you certify that people can actually do it. I know that sales reps want to get on and they want to start talking to customers and prospects, but you want to put them in a position where they can have good calls and be successful by making sure they have the foundation of knowledge associated with that.
Mm.
I want to take the tribal learnings, which Modus has some really phenomenal leaders and really strong reps. And how do you bring that down so that everyone is telling the same story that's most effective and gets the best possible outcome?
And then how do you go about, once you've found that, how do you go about reinforcing those behaviors and reinforcing the right things to make sure that everybody is doing it? It's one thing to introduce them
Mhm.
to something and to provide the knowledge that they have, but how do you then go about making sure that they're consistently exhibiting those behaviors and habits?
Sure. So I think so. Part of it is the certification process that I talked about to make sure that they can talk about it in the right way.
Mm,
When I was a sales rep, I had a very simple philosophy. When I joined an organization or I was part of a new role, I would find the person that did it the best. I would sit next to him or her, and I try to just do the same thing more. And I think oftentimes the mistake that reps make is they try to make it their own too quickly. So
mm.
they lose some of the context of why that talk track is most successful. So certification is one piece. The other is inspection and being on as many calls as I can. I mean, I've already started the process in week one of scheduling every sales call that I can listen to, because I want to see where the sales reps are in
Mm.
their development, where maybe some, ways to expedite the process of developing talent, but also understanding, what they're doing well and where may be some low-hanging fruit in terms of immediately adding value as a senior leader.
Let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the market and some of the you mentioned the value proposition and some of the customers and focus that you want to go after. How do you dissect that and tackle it in a way so that Motus can be successful, you can be successful, the team can be successful?
Great question, Jay. First of it is really understanding who are your most profitable customers. What industries are they? What are the attributes associated with them? And what value are they getting from Modus as an organization? So from my perspective, I've just started that journey in terms of, requesting information and trying to understand it and building segments around that. Once we identify who our most profitable customers are, then looking at it in terms of what is the white space associated with those attributes. And then the other piece, which I can't, understate, is in what is the sales cycle required to go after those customers. So we do sell to enterprise, we do sell to mid-market. And then last year, we launched a successful SMB go-to-market strategy. So for me, it's sort of like, how do we look at the value of that particular customer to us, and then weigh it against what is the sales cycle and the effort to go after it, and marrying those three different market segments with a go-to-market strategy that enables us to hit our goals and really continue the growth in the marketplace.
If the sales, you mentioned, what is the sales cycle required? If let's say, for instance, the sales cycle required to hit one of those three markets is, let's just say it takes longer than is beneficial, I guess, to the organization. Do you as a leader, do you look at it and say, okay, well, maybe this isn't a market that we should focus on because it's not worth the cost to actually focus on that market? Do you look at ways to improve, perhaps shorten the sales cycle, and do those types of things? How do you think about that when you look at the sales cycle and the required effort?
Some of it has to do with what's the return on investment, Jay. And what I look at is then it comes down to allocating resources.
Hmm.
So, do you want to chase a whale that's $1 million deal that's going to tie up, 6 or 7 resources for a full year? Maybe. It all depends. But when I look at it overall as it relates to the targets and the expectations of the business, what is the right strategy? What are the right allocation of resources to go after the marketplace in a disciplined and organized way to be able to bring in these profitable customers and be able to hit the targets that are expected from a business perspective. So it's think of it as sort of making soup, and what are the ingredients you put in to try to make it perfect. And a lot of it is testing and learning along the way.
And what things are what indicators are you looking for along the way? Like what are you testing? What are some of the things that you're looking for to say? Because obviously you have to have those short wins, um, especially if it is a whale, right? To see, and maybe that's how often things are advancing in the pipeline, what kind of conversations you're having. Like tell me what that looks like when you're inspecting.
Yeah, I think ultimately what you're trying to do is when you think about each one of those segments, and it could be based on industry spend potential, in our particular world, thinking about fleet as an example, how many drivers do they have is one piece of it. When you think about mobile, how many employees do they have? Because they're very different, even though the reimbursement space is, there's a lot of synergy between fleet and mobile. They're also very different.
Mm.
So if you think about it, there may be an organization that has 100 drivers, but they might have 6,000 employees. So, when you go in and you talk to them and try to identify the opportunity, how we can help them, the approach might be different based on the size of their fleet and the number of employees they have. And because the economics in terms of what the cost associated with each one of our products, you may decide that this is someone that we focus only on fleet or we only focus on mobile. And in the best cases, you focus on both because of the problems that we can solve for them. And again, keep in mind, Jay, this is week 1, so I'm still learning the nomenclature here. But I do think that it's really trying to be disciplined and making sure that we understand. Now, as a business, we are more outbound than traditional high-tech businesses. So, 70-80% of what we do is outbound. So we're very targeted and very disciplined. We go through a suspecting process to really understand what the opportunity is, and then we attack based on the information that we get from that. So for me, it enables us, when you think about putting together the sales strategy, it enables us to really have different lanes that make sense as we put together that proverbial soup that I mentioned.
And speaking of the soup and the strategy, how do you separate, I guess, the ingredients of the soup sometimes when it's already in there? Like, in other words, we talked about SMB, mid-market, and enterprise, and you talk about some of the nuances of understanding what the sales cycle is. And then you also talked about the difference between going after, say, fleet versus customers or versus, let's say, mobile device and that type of thing. Um, if you how do you know if it's the, let's say, the strategy, or it's the people that are maybe playing in the wrong position? So how do you separate that to make sure that you have the right people for the right strategy?
Now, it's a great question, Jan. I think that's as a leader, that's something that you lose a lot of sleep over. I think part of it is rolling up your sleeves and being in sales calls and understanding from a talent perspective, what is the team capable of? So that's the people piece. And then the other side of it is doing some rationalization around, is the right strategy? And
Mhm.
what is the right strategy to go to market? And again, if we rewind back up, 4 or 5 minutes ago, when we sort of talked about the different market segments, is understanding what it takes to be successful in those particular segments from a leadership perspective, from a partnership perspective, i.e. with our internal partners, as well as making sure that you're putting sales reps in a position where they can be successful. So ultimately, as I take a step back and I look at, the strategy that's in place, is it the right strategy? What types of changes in the strategy might make sense based on due diligence and understanding the market and listening to what, is going on in the sales process? And then based on that, trying to make sure you have the right people in the right roles so they can be successful, aligning with that overall strategy, if that makes sense.
How much time do you, well, two questions, I guess. Do you come with a playbook? In other words, you've obviously, this is not your first rodeo. Is there a playbook that you followed, or maybe playbook isn't the right word, but a process, I guess, that you have for building process and these types of things? And then how, if you do, how long do you give it before you need to start tweaking things in, wherever it is, whether it's the process or people and so forth?
I think one of the best attributes for a sales leader is to be naturally curious and ask a lot of questions.
Mm.
And I think that's something that at times has probably driven people crazy, just asking questions upon questions to understand. I don't think there's a timeline, although there is an expectation in terms of putting a strategy in place that can hit the objectives that need to happen. So from my perspective, what I try to do is I try to gather as much information I can from finance, from marketing, from sales leadership that's in place, or those that may have left, and sort of the strategy that they undertook, and try to understand that in relations to the market and what I know about the market and what I can learn about it, and then try to put together an organized plan that makes sense. So I'll give you an example. When you look at the three market segments, enterprise, mid-market, and SMB, there's very different sales cycles associated with that. But then you have to look at it from the context of what is the average order size, what is the ability to go and sell different products across their business, and then trying to weigh one against the other. And then obviously you want your strategy to supersede the talent that you have, but then look to how do I align the talent with the strategy over time.
Mm.
Because if I make a decision on strategy based on the talent I have here and now, I might be missing massive opportunity. Conversely, if I put a strategy in place, I need to be able to hire or develop reps to move into the strategy to be successful. So, it can be a very quick change if there's something that looks incredibly broken, or it might be something that's more gradual. It really depends on the current situation. 4.5 days in, or 4 days and 3 hours into the job, I already see some things that I wonder, how did we get to this point of arrival? What don't I know? Because it may not be something that I would logically gravitate towards, but there might be really good reasons in the marketplace why we're doing something a certain way. So again, asking a lot of questions and trying to understand that and see what they've tried in the past as well, Jay, because, if I come in and, one of the interesting things at D&B is when I was in that position, I often heard, oh, we've done that before. And for me, it's like, okay, that's good. That, all the data points tells me we should do this. Why did we stray away from that particular strategy? And for me, I try to stay away from being discouraged by we've done that before, and seek to understand, if you did it before, what did you learn when you did it, and
Mm.
why may that not work, or why may it work as we move forward and think about that as a go forward strategy.
Tell me about two things. Goal setting, right? How do you set the right expectations of management in terms of what to expect, and then how do you set the goals for your team so that they are achievable, but not so achievable, I guess, right? So that they're really stretching and delivering what the company needs.
Sure. I think when you talk about organizational communication, I come back to the open and transparency. That's really important. Part of my job is, obviously there's a corporate target, and it rolls across all the different sales channels and sales teams. For me, what I need to do is develop a relationship with other leaders and be very candid of what I'm looking at and what I think is possible. And oftentimes you see people that will be, sandbag or tell a story, and then all of a sudden they're at 160%. For me, I think it's really important that you're very honest and be very clear as to what the risk is, what your concerns are, but also what's possible. And then I always talk about what's possible plus 10%, right? So, I want to make sure that people understand, here's what I think we can do, but I think that it's reasonable to expect a stretch, because the reason I'm in this position is to try to accelerate above expectations. For me, I think it's really important that you don't develop a reputation as someone who's going to cry wolf and, try to get quotas repressed as much as possible. For me, I think it's really, really important that you're trying to be very forthcoming in terms of what risks are, and you manage that risk as part of your conversation with other senior leaders in management. As it relates to the reps, part of it is developing an attitude of what's possible and making sure that you're holding people accountable for doing the job the right way, and that we put goals in front of them that are realistic but aren't a foregone conclusion. And again, part of any new leader moving into a role like myself is there is an expectation that I have and the company has. The reason they invested in me is to get more out of that particular part of the organization. And part of that is making sure that the team understands what's expected of them and what the path is to get there, and how I'm going to support that path and their development so they have an opportunity to be successful, if that makes sense, Jay.
Yeah. And so how do you mentioned earlier where, the strategy might change. In other words, you might have a person in place right now for today's go-to market, but tomorrow's go-to market might look different. How do you hire for tomorrow, I guess, if you will, right? In other words, how do you hire a person for today to do what they need to do to today, knowing that things might need to change, and it might need to change in a big way?
So first off, for any of my Modus employees that are like this, I'm not I'm not going to let Jay tell me that we're definitely going to change. But it's fair to say that it's probably, the likelihood of making some adjustments at the very least makes sense.
Yes.
So I think part of it is when you think about a change in strategy, you have to look at your short term, where you are, and then what your point of arrival is. And then there's a lot of different things that go into getting to that point of arrival. It could be people, it could be process. There's any number of things that can change. So as part of that journey is you try to think about what that end state is, and how do you either develop or bring from the outside people that can do the job as you see it down the road. Ideally, you want to develop your own talent internally whenever possible. When not, you call J. David Group and they help you with the right people, of course. But then you look for people that you can bring in that can that have the requisite experience and skills to be able to do the job the right way. So from my perspective, it's really you have to have vision on what that point of arrival is, and then start thinking about how do you get there from a people perspective first, but also all the other things that goes along with that journey.
And let's get into the weeds a little bit in terms of sales management. And you were talking about rolling up your sleeves and listening in on calls and doing all that. How do you go about defining those small wins in when you're in deal, and what are some of the things that you're looking for as prospects are entered into the pipeline and then moving through the pipeline, so that gives you confidence that we are going to meet our forecast by in Q1 and Q2 and so forth?
Sure. First and foremost, I think it's really important to validate and understand, are we where we think we are as part of the sales process? Right. I think oftentimes reps may not. I always talk about there's very clearly defined steps in any sales process, and when deals go sideways and they don't happen as promised on time, it's because you've missed a step or you don't have something. And I don't want to call it happy years, but that's terminology that's very common. It's really, really important to have rigor in your inspection process, in your pre-call planning, as well as your post-call debrief, to make sure you know what you know and what you don't know. And you never assume that you know something unless you actually heard it. So if you have 10 steps in your sales process and someone doesn't know 3 of them, those could be the 3 that make a deal go sideways. So it's really, really important that you have an honest conversation as part of where something is in the pipeline with the team, to make sure that they know what don't I know, so that the next interaction with the customer, they can validate what that data point is and make sure they understand it. We have a very clearly defined, well thought out sales process at Motus. And again, when I've done inspection and talked to the leaders, it's when they don't have one of those steps defined is where they get, things that can go along in the sales process in the pipeline that lead to a deal not closing on time as promised.
Yep, I get that. That makes sense. And in terms of your let's say for instance, if you were talking about cross collaboration with other leadership and also working with your team, when you need to change in one way or another, or focus on one initiative that is new, let's just say, to the team, or new to the company, how are you able to get buy-in and build confidence that, even though we're going in this direction, this is the right way to go?
Sure. I mean, some of it is about building trust
Hmm.
and helping the team understand what your core values are so that they don't think that you're making an impulsive change, first and foremost. The other is behind any change in strategy, there's a rationale why you're doing that.
Hmm.
And I believe that if you can communicate that and help people understand why you're making that decision, um, they at least understand that there's some thought and it's not done in a whimsical manner. So part of it is building credibility with the team, whether it be my peers, whether it be the folks that work as part of my organization. Ultimately, we have the same goal. We want to be successful as an organization. But I think people are entitled to the degree in which you can share it with them, why we're making these decisions and what the expected outcome is of making any changes in strategy or in tactics.
What about, how do you hire for growth? When do you hire for growth? In other words, how do you know that now's the time where we need to add additional capacity and additional heads?
I mean, some of that is a negotiation with finance. Quite
Mhm.
honestly, I think it's really, really important that you have good finance partners because anytime you take on a new person, you want to make sure that you can get a return on investment over the course of a certain period of time. And part of that is we have to get, every sales leader needs to get better at having a repeatable process to get people up and going and contributing revenue as quickly as possible. But when you think about that, for me to go and say, I want to add this head or that head, I need to be able to show that from a P&L perspective, that it's going to be a positive impact on the business and when that break even point is for that individual. Because you always want to try to hire ahead because the attrition is inevitable, but you want to make sure you do it in such a way that you can show that the end game is that we will be further ahead in terms of profitability, further ahead in terms of reaching our goal, and that we're bringing in profitable business, not only in terms of the cost associated with acquisition, but also the cost of managing those new customers over time. So it's a balancing act, Jay. I mean, listen, every sales leader in the world would like to follow the insurance approach where you hire 10 people knowing that 9 are going to drop off and that one gets all the accounts that those 9 actually sold to,
Right.
and that one superstar. But in this day and age where every dollar is important from a corporate perspective, you have to have a lot more discipline in terms of how you go in terms of growing the business.
Is there are there any leading indicators? In other words, for instance, a capacity issue where that your members on your team are stretched, and maybe uh, deals in the pipeline are slowing down, not because they don't have the right behaviors and those types of things. It's just not enough time, so to speak, I guess, to get to them. How often is that the case? And is that really a time to make a decision higher?
That's a great question, Jay. I think there's two types of sales organizations where one's easier than the other. When you're predominantly inbound,
Hmm.
there's very clear metrics in terms of leads, how many leads are qualified, opportunities, and how many ultimately close. When I was at Constant Contact, we had a very, very rigorous process where every time we increased inbound leads by 400, I'd hire a body, and I usually it was 350 because we could get ahead of that.
Hmm.
In a very predictable model where your business is driven predominantly from inbound lead flow,
Hmm.
you can look at the leads coming in, and that's just a math problem. From an outbound perspective, when you're more predominantly outbound, you really have to look at, how much someone can actively manage in their pipeline, how much are they able to put in the pipeline, and what are the metrics that lead to sales, and then match that up against the addressable market. And then it comes down to profitability against potential in the marketplace. So again, that's where you have to talk to your finance partner in both scenarios and figure out what is the point in which we can justify bringing in another person based on what revenue will follow.
Yeah, that's also a sales ops conversation maybe too as well, because you talk about addressable market, and if you're, like you said, you're outbound, and if you have, let's say, let's say you have 10 reps, and the addressable market is beyond what those reps can reasonably put into the pipeline, then it's like, okay, well, where else can we, where can we find more capacity to be able to do this? And then how are we going to divide up the territories, or how are we going to divide up the accounts to do that? Is that right? Am I thinking?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the first things I did was kind of understand, all right, we have a structure of the sales organization. We have territories that have been assigned. How did we come to that point of arrival? What were the assumptions?
Right.
The Modus, I'm very fortunate to have a very strong sales operations leader who has done a lot of the heavy lifting for me coming in the door. So it was, when I asked that, it was like, press a button and here's all this information. Then I've got to look at it and, and then have conversations to seek to understand it. And I think that what they have in place is really well thought out. As I look at accelerating growth, the question is, is there things that we could change to speed up revenue? Do we have the requisite skills to do that? How do we take advantage of that? But from my perspective, I looked at my markets and I said, tell me what defines an enterprise market. Tell me what the sales cycle is. Tell me about the success of the enterprise team. Let's look at the regional team. What defines regional teams? What's the success they've had? And then look at it how it's all been attacked previous to my arrival in terms of the go-to-market strategy.
I want to end before we get into the rapid fire five to talk about what we started with, which is relationships. And obviously you've led teams for 20 plus years, and you've developed a lot of relationships, and you've developed salespeople over the years. How important is building relationships with your team, and then having the ability, more broadly, I would say, to continue to recruit the right people to do everything that we're talking about doing? Because obviously, without having the right people, all this becomes really, really difficult.
I think one of the most important thing from a leader's perspective is developing a relationship with the employees built on respect.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because many young leaders want to be liked, and there's an important difference. From my perspective, the first thing I've done this week is meet with all my leaders. Next week, I'm meeting with my peers and spending time with them. And then I'm also meeting with every member of my organization. And I think it's important to build those relationships and understand what motivates them, how they're viewing themselves, the role, et cetera. And that's going to help me in terms of the overall development of a cohesive team. But it's built on respect. I'm not the guy that says, hey, let's go out for drinks necessarily. For me, there's all those things that you can do around team building, but it's really important that people understand what your core values are and and I articulate what I'm looking for from the team to do, so that we can all be aligned towards a common goal. So for me, that's the starting point, Jay.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. All right, let's go into the rapid fire five. Well, I ask you 5 questions, you give me 5 answers, and we get to know you a little bit better, Devin, even me, after all these years. You ready? Here's something I don't know about you. Do you have a morning routine? And if so, what is it?
Sure. My morning routine is to get online as quickly as possible. What I find is that in days, if I'm not in front of my computer or on the phone with the team, I'm not as effective, because what I find is that as the day wanes, you get pulled in different directions. It's having that discipline to go through my list. If you listen to the NFL, there are certain coaches that sort of script their first 10 days. I try to script my morning, at least the first couple hours, make sure that I have all my tasks that I know I need to do for the day outlined, get through emails that came in overnight, so that I can be highly effective and really try to knock off as many things as I can as quickly as possible in an effective manner.
So let me ask you a follow-up question to that, which is that is there a period of time where you block out email? In other words, you're not looking at it because you're focused on other things, and then you come back to it, or not?
I try to be as disciplined as possible that I can. And this is certainly something I would encourage sales reps to do, is that it's very easy to be reactive to email during the course of the day. Mm-hmm. And what that does, unfortunately, is it takes you off a normal cadence that can make you incredibly effective. So I try to look at the top of the hour whenever possible, but try to be disciplined during those 50 minutes not to do it. There are so many interruptions between Slack and Teams and emails and phone calls that, you find yourself not being in a position to focus on the tasks that are most important to give you the success, regardless of role, because you're always in defense mode. It's sort of like a hockey goalie, trying to block the puck wherever it comes at you, as opposed to really being disciplined and focused. And I think that's something from a time management that every leader and every rep should really focus on, to make the most out of your day by being disciplined in terms of how you approach every hour of the day.
It makes sense. What are you most excited about right now, personally and professionally?
I think on a personal level, I'm excited that we've gotten through the first almost year of this awful pandemic, and that there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel from a medical perspective. I think from a global economy standpoint, I'm encouraged of what 2021 last year was sort of like, let's all hang on. And I know there were companies that prospered and did great. In fact, D&B did really well during that time period. I think the closer we get back to business as usual, the better everyone's going to be. And I do know there's a lot of people out there that are hurting, and I encourage them to just stick with it and stay focused and do the best you can. I think from a professional standpoint, I'm starting a new journey, and I'm very, very excited about that. I'm excited about the people that I've met. I'm excited about the leadership team that I'm going to be a part of, and I'm looking forward to from a new business perspective, focusing on bringing our message to a marketplace. We've got a lot of problems that we can solve for our customers and prospects, but if we don't tell them about it, we can't do that. So, that's really important to me in terms of personally and professionally. And I'm looking forward to 2021. I think The Who has a song that talks about 2021 being a great year, or 21 being a great year. I think there was a different connotation, but I'm looking forward to it from a professional standpoint, and just looking forward to 21 being great for everyone here.
We can all be 21 again in 2021.
Yeah.
What do you want to get better at right now?
I always want to be a better leader. I have a lot of years of experience. I think that being naturally curious and always wanting to improve, regardless of role or function, is the most important thing for everybody. I try to get better. I make mistakes like everyone else, and I try to learn from them. So for me, it's constant improvement. I have a mantra that I try to make my sales organization 1% better every morning. So I wake up in the morning and I think, what's that one thing I can do to make us that little bit better? And if I execute against that 5 days a week, 50 weeks in a year, we're 250% better or thereabouts.
Fantastic. What keeps you motivated?
I'm someone that have two things. One is fear of failure, and one is the responsibilities to my family. So, I have always tried to be better, as I mentioned with your previous question, so that I wouldn't have to worry about failure. And then, my responsibility to my family, to the people that work for me, and the people that I love are very important to me.
How do you consume your information? What's your preference? Books, blogs, articles, podcasts like this, events?
I try to do a little bit of everything, Jay. I'm a big reader. It's important to me. I do listen to podcasts, even yours. I read a lot of blogs. I also try to reach out to people that I respect and understand, what have they learned recently, and how did they consume that. The last book I bought was a book that it had nothing to do with business. It was about how people around the world survive on $2 a day.
Interesting.
The author was Daryl Collins, and for me, it's really trying to understand how the other part of the world survives. We're all fortunate. Many of the people that will be and listen to this podcast make 50, 60, 100, $200,000 a year. And oftentimes it's humbling and gives you perspective to think about how the overarching number of people in the world survive on, less than $1,000 a year. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You're absolutely right about that. I noticed that, by the way, in commercials. I don't know why I'm so partial. Maybe just because of 2020. Every commercial that I watch, if you notice, everybody in there is rich. Like they're just big, opulent, homes and floor to ceiling windows and happy family and all that. And I'm like, man, what about the people? It's just, I don't know. I just feel like there are people watching that are just not anywhere near there. And it's just so exclusive, I guess, of what they're actually realizing in their own lives. So it's just always something to think about. Sure.
I mean, we are very fortunate to live in this country that we live in, and the opportunity that presents to us. And if you go back to, I'm a little bit of a history buff, and you talk about, the Constitution and how this company was formed. That your lot in life was not based on your bloodline; it's based on hard work. And I think that's something that is unique about America. And I think that we are fortunate to have been given that opportunity, and hopefully everyone takes advantage of it. Whereas there are people in other parts of the world that just don't have those opportunities available to them.
That's right, because bloodline is how their fate is defined, and oftentimes, for sure. My friend, Devin Golden, you've done it again, my friend. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you helping me out and coming on and going over quota. Goodbye, everybody. I'm cueing the music.